the industrialization, commoditization, centralization was done for really good purposes. It was done to make food cheap and abundant and safe in one sense of the word. And it was wildly successful, but it had unintended consequences that fell on the backs of the animals, the environmental impact to the land and the water, and to the impoverishment of rural America.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 51, and my guest is Will Harris. Will is a fourth-generation cattleman, and he is the owner of White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia. Will attended the University of Georgia School of Agriculture, where he was trained in industrial farming methods. But in 1995, he decided to turn things around and return to farming the land in the manner his great-grandfather had done 130 years before. He is now recognized all over the world as a leader in humane animal husbandry and environmental sustainability. As you hear Will's story, you'll come to understand how and why he transitioned to regenerative agriculture and how you can support this movement. Before diving in, we want to take a moment and thank our sponsors. Wise Traditions is supported in part by listeners like you. We count on your support to keep the podcast going and to share our valuable content with the world. Go to westonaprice.org and make a gift of any size to continue this work. Thank you. And Green Pasture Products. Green Pasture Products offering fermented cod liver oil, concentrated butter oil, and coconut oil in a variety of products and blends. Visit greenpastureproducts.com. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Will.
Thank you, Hilda. Glad to be here today.
So I understand White Oak Pastures has been in your family for over 150 years. Is that right?
That's right. My great-grandfather came to our farm in Bluffton, Georgia in 1866. So this is our 150th year. And my daughter, I have two daughters that work with me on the farm. One of them's going to have a baby in December, and that will be the sixth generation on the farm coming in the 150th year.
Wow, you must be so excited.
I really am. I sure am.
That's a beautiful thing. Now, has it always been an organic, sustainable farm, Will?
No, we went through the same genesis that others did. When my great-grandfather and grandfather ran the farm, it would have been a high animal welfare, very regenerative ag practices, because that's how people farmed prior to World War II. My father took over the farm in 1946. And that's when his generation really made sweeping changes to agriculture. We could talk a lot about what those are, but basically they industrialized, commoditized, and centralized.
Wow, yeah, I want you to go into that. What does that mean? Those three items, can you elaborate?
Yeah, sure. So the industrialization, what I frame as the industrialization is moving the farm to the factory farm model. Mm-hmm. Pigs on a pig factory, chickens on a chicken factory, like shirts on a shirt factory, and cars on a car factory. That was the industrialization. The centralization meant that agriculture regionalized. Prior to that era, every little town had a flour mill and a slaughterhouse, abattoir, a corn grist mill. During that era, we moved the slaughter industry to the middle of the country. And other things centralized. And it had all these changes had some unintended negative consequences. The commoditization is one that's really interesting. Prior to that time, farmers sold their own production locally. So it was in a farmer's best interest to have a good reputation that he raised the best wheat or pigs or chickens around, because he could get a premium for it. Mm-hmm. And in that era, USDA established minimum standards. And at that point, farmers were not incentivized to make their products the best it could be, they were incentivized to just meet the minimum standards. If they made it better, they put value into the product they couldn't extract back from the market.
It wouldn't pay off economically.
You would go broke raising really good produce, pigs, chickens, tomatoes, and selling it for the commodity price. You would go broke.
Right, that makes sense. Oh, so it's almost like in school, if you know you're going to pass, if it's just pass fail, right? You just want to pass. You're not going to try to get an A because it doesn't matter.
That's a very good analogy.
Yeah. So I can see where these things, this movement to industrialize, centralize, and commoditize had these unintended consequences. So you found yourself inheriting a farm that was under this new system, right?
I did. My father was a commodity beef cattle producer. I went to the University of Georgia, and I learned commodity beef cattle production there and came home and did it for 20 years. The industrialization, commoditization, centralization was done for really good purposes. It was done to make food cheap and abundant and safe in one sense of the word. Mm-hmm. And it was wildly successful, but it had unintended consequences that fell on the backs of the animals, the environmental impact to the land and the water, and to the impoverishment of rural America.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were talking about, like we do T-shirts in a T-shirt factory, pigs in a pig factory. What if we raised our children like that? Like you can immediately see that that's not good, but somehow we didn't make that association with the animals, did we?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We, on the welfare side with the animals, good animal welfare in the industrial system has come to mean that you keep the animals fed and watered and within a reasonable temperature range, and you don't intentionally inflict pain and suffering. And that's good animal welfare, except it's really not. That's like saying, I'm going to raise my children, I'm going to put them in a closet, but it's going to be a 72 degrees, and I'll give them something to lie down on and, leave the lights on for them, and they'll never get, break their leg playing football or skin their knee on the bicycle or be abducted.
Oh,
but it's not good parenting.
No.
Good animal welfare to us today means creating an environment in which the animal can express instinctive behavior. Chickens were born to scratch and peck. Hogs were born to root and wallow. Cows were born to roam and graze. And the industrial system in which these 90-something% of these animals are raised does not allow them to express that instinctive behavior.
And so you were on the farm, you'd gone to the University of Georgia, you were back on there working it, and you could see something's wrong with this picture, right? That's why you were making a transition. And did you see it also with the vegetation? I mean, with plants or produce that you were raising?
Well, we weren't raising produce at the time.
Oh, I see.
But I did return home and raised livestock, cattle. We had a monoculture of only cattle, just like you have a monoculture in a factory. And I raised animals that way for 20 years and really loved it for a long time. But the longer I did it, the less I liked it. And the reason is I had somehow become aware of and later sensitive to those unintended consequences, and it just wasn't very pleasant for me.
What was happening to the animals that you could see?
So during that era, we were again a monoculture of only cattle, and today I rail against monocultural production. Nature abhors a monoculture. Nature wants a smorgasbord of many different microbes and insects and plants and animals, living in symbiotic relationships with each other. But that's not what we had. We had a monoculture of only cattle. And we fed them corn, which is a very, very unnaturally high carbohydrate diet for cows. It's kind of like raising your children and eating candy. You'd make them fat because that's what you wanted. And in that commodity system, you wanted them fat. We also used a lot of what I call performance-enhancing drugs. We used hormone implants that we put under the skin to make them gain weight faster. We used antibiotics in a way that's called subtherapeutic. That means you give antibiotics to animals that aren't sick, but it makes them gain weight more efficiently. And the other classes of drugs that we use, ionophores and some others, that it was all about gaining weight as cheaply as possible.
Wow. And so you wanted to make a switch. How'd you start?
I started very, very gradually. In fact, when I started that journey, the only thing I ever really intended to do was give up performance-enhancing drugs and the high carbohydrate diet of corn and the confinement feedings, feeding them in a very small place so they wouldn't walk and lose weight. And I did that for a few years, and actually it was not financially successful. I still made money, but I made less money than I had previously. But I liked it better, so it was okay. But I became aware of the impact of using chemical fertilizer and pesticides on my pastures. So I gave that up, and that was more painful economically. At that point, I was putting a lot of value into the cattle than I was able to extract from the market. So it financially was not good, very break-even-ish, and I couldn't do that for many years. So at that point, we built our first on-farm abattoir or slaughterhouse. Later, we built a second one for poultry. That was for red meat. But then that started working for us financially because we were able to sell the beef only at that time to consumers that had an appreciation for the additional value we were putting in it. No hormones, no grass-fed, But we still had a monoculture of only cattle. And a monoculture will fall apart if you don't use the tools that reductionist science has given us that allows the monoculture to work. You got to give them.
So what you're saying is it doesn't work to just change a couple of things, which is what you were trying to do.
That's exactly right. Let me go a little deeper into that. There is a difference in my mind between complicated and complex. That computer and that watch and your automobile are very complicated. Your body, my farm, an organization like a university or a church, they're complex. And the difference is, in a complicated system like a watch, if one component ceases to work, it stops.
Right.
No longer functions. In your body or my farm or a university, if one facet ceases to work, something else steps up and takes over for it.
Right.
So reductionist science works great for complicated systems. That's how we built watches and computers, cars. But when you try to apply reductionist science that works so well on complicated situations to my farm, your body, the university, it doesn't work so well because the variables change and you wind up with unintended consequences.
Right.
I think that's the reason we have so many pharmaceutical recalls. I think it's the reason that monoculture on my farm didn't work.
Right, like with a pharmaceutical drug, they think, okay, this will help the kidney, let's say. But there are all these unintended consequences on other parts of the body because it's all interrelated.
It's holistic.
Yes.
That's exactly right. You should, I'll throw a plug in here for Alan Savory or Savory Institute. It's just too long to talk about it, but Google Savory Institute. Alan Savory is the father of holistic range and pasture management. And my farm is one of 17 Savory hubs that's on 6 continents. There's 3 east of the Mississippi, and White Oak Pastures is one of them.
Yes, Will, and I'm excited because we're at this conference right now, and I get to visit your farm on Monday. I can't wait to see it.
Oh, we love having guests. We actually built a restaurant on the farm. We've got a culinary school trained chef that runs it, and we eat really well. And we've got cabins on the farm for people to come and spend the night with us.
Wow, I'm going to have to bring my whole family out sometime. So going back to where we were, so you thought you would just make a few initial changes on the farm, but realized it's not going to work like that. So what did you do next?
Okay, so we built the slaughterhouses. That gave us a problem that wound up being a real gift, and that is the waste stream from the slaughterhouses. That kind of solid and liquid waste handling is a real problem in huge plants. But because my plants sit in the middle of my 2,500 acre farm, we were able to use the Cornell University dead animal composting system. And so that waste stream actually becomes a real benefit to the land. Mm-hmm. And since we've been making that compost, using animal impact on the land, not using chemical fertilizers and pesticides, the organic matter in my soil has gone from less than 0.5% to over 5%.
Well, this is really interesting that you're saying this, because all I hear environmentalists say is, oh my gosh, all the waste from chickens are ruining the bay or what have you. But they're talking about a different kind of farming, aren't they?
Well, that's the industrialized farming,
yeah.
And then it's centralized. We, at our slaughterhouse, we slaughter about 140 head of cattle per week, and lesser numbers of other species, sheep, goats, hogs. And that sounds like a lot, but at a big industrial plant, they will slaughter 400 head per hour, 16 hours a day. So it's just an enormous waste stream, and it's usually in something like an industrial park. So it's not in the middle of a farm that can use the waste material. That's one of the unintended consequences of that sort of centralization, industrialization. Mm-hmm. It made beef slaughter very efficient, mm-hmm. but unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
It cost us probably $400 to slaughter a cow and put it in where I can sell it to the customer. A big industrial plant can do it for maybe $100, but it has unintended consequences. And even in terms of the labor situation, my little plant, we have 130 employees. We're the largest private employer in our county, and a big industrial plant will have thousands of employees, and the community can't support it. And that's when you have so much trouble with undocumented people coming in to do that work.
We want to pause now and thank our sponsors, listeners like you. Hello, my name is Inego Montoya, had this to say on iTunes. Hello, Hilda and Weston A. Price Foundation. Thank you so very much for providing this medium to learn this essential information. You are awesome. Keep up the great work. Thanks for these kind words. We are open to your feedback and would love to hear from any of you. Let us know what topics you're interested in or what you'd like us to address in the future. Email me at podcast@westonaprice.org or comment and rate and review us on iTunes. And Green Pasture Products. Green Pasture Products produces fermented cod liver oil and concentrated butter oil in a variety of flavors in liquid gel and capsule form. They also offer organic virgin coconut oil, virgin coconut ghee, and a complete oil blend that includes all of the nourishing oils. Lastly, they produce skincare balms and various byproducts that enrich the soil and the feed of farm animals. Go to greenpastureproducts.com. Well, speaking about dollars and cents, you said at first when you started making the switch, it wasn't really financially viable. What happened? I'm guessing eventually it did become so.
It did. It turned around. So I explained to the people that I work with every day that, our farm is like it's a stool with three legs. There's production out in the pasture, growing the animals, breeding and growing the animals. There's processing. We built the abattoirs to do that and slaughter the chickens and cows and other species. And there's marketing, turning that product into money. Mm-hmm. And of course, when we built those plants, we had a tremendous amount of really high value meat and poultry to sell and hadn't developed adequate markets for it. Mm-hmm. So we had to really hit the ground running and find customers to buy it. And we did in the form of Whole Foods Market, Publix Supermarket, Kroger, food service companies like U.S. Foods and Cisco. Now we're making another change in business to consumer. We have a website, whiteoakpastures.com, with an online store. And we've invested in a pretty efficient for us order fulfillment center on the farm. So we ship meat and poultry and other products to 48 states through FedEx and UPS.
Wow. Now I understand that last prong, that marketing, is one of the biggest hurdles for farmers because they might be good at what they do, or the small farmer, right? But how do they get it out to the public?
I don't know that that's any more difficult than the processing. The part we all love is the production. We all farm because all of us who farm because we enjoy that lifestyle, and it's just who we are and what we do. So it's our vocation and avocation and hobby and legacy. And the processing part is something none of us really want to do. Mm-hmm. But in our case, we did it. We did it because we had to. Mm-hmm. Then the marketing is the next necessary component. And I guess the most difficult decision that a farmer has to make, it's probably no different from other businesses, is at what scale do I want to operate? Mm-hmm. And if it's at a very small scale, you sell your products at the farmer's market, and it's great. It's fine. In our case, that was not an option for two reasons. One is I had to build a processing plant. I didn't have a local processor. So that meant I had to sell a lot of it. I couldn't sell it at the farmer's market.
I see.
I'm also in a very economically impoverished area. Not a lot of sophisticated consumers that are looking for my kind of product.
Mm-hmm. So if someone starts farming in this way, it's no longer the monoculture, it's no longer industrialized farming, it can actually enrich rural America that's struggling economically.
Oh, absolutely. As I pointed out that we've got 130 employees in a town with 100 people. And I was told by our accountant that our average pay last year to our employees was $36,000, which doesn't sound like much to you, but in my county, the average is $18,000. So it's about twice as much.
Yeah.
So, and along with that, I think that enriching the soil, we've depleted our soil. We've really done some great reductionist kinds of activities on the land and caused it to lose productivity. I mentioned the 0.5% organic model, mm-hmm. which is a dead mineral medium. So using animal impact on the land improves the land, and I think that improves the quality of life of the people that work on that land. I think that improves the community. I think you got to grow it from the soil up.
Mm-hmm. So it's got benefits on all these levels. The animals are happier, their animal welfare is up, the environment is benefiting, and economically for the people.
Well, I think so, and I hope that, I'm convinced that my animal welfare is much improved over what I was doing 20 years ago. There's no comparison. I'm convinced that the regenerative practices on my soil have improved it dramatically. There's no arguing that. You can come look at it. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt that the community is better off because you can see it. We've built refurbished houses and stores, and it's just very evident. What I don't know but hope is that the products I produce are equally as beneficial for my customers. Mm-hmm. I think I'm an expert in animal welfare, regenerative farm practices, and rural economy. That's mm-hmm. the things I just talked about. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nutritionalist. I'm not a dietitian. Mm-hmm. So I don't address food safety and health and nutrient density. We're here at this conference, and there are a lot of people that are addressing those things. Yes. It makes me feel really good about what I produce from my customer's perspective. But I know the land and the animals and the community are better off.
Now, what do your farmer friends think? Are there still some around you that are into the monoculture system?
Essentially, everybody around me is still farming the way they have and the way I used to. And, I'm not an evangelist. I'm not trying to get people to change how they farm. I respect their right to farm the way they want to. They better respect my right to farm the way I want to. And they're financially financially rewarded for the way they farm. The commodity, industrial, centralized system works really well economically for commodity farmers.
But I just feel like, I know you're not an evangelist, but if I were your farming neighbor and I saw how happy all the different species were, and there's a different vibe because of the animal welfare and what's happening environmentally, don't they look and just naturally express curiosity or interest? Has anybody changed?
No one's changed, and I think that probably that recognition is there. But keep in mind that these guys are making money, and they didn't borrow $7.5 million. So, financially, the risk to reward ratio that we learn about in school is much better for them than it is me. We're making money, we're cash flow positive, it's fine, but my return on investment is probably not as good as my neighbor's.
So there's some sacrifice involved.
There's a lot of risk.
Well, this is fascinating. And again, I'm eager to see this in practice when I come out to your farm on Monday. But please answer this question. If the listener could only do one thing to improve their health, what would you suggest that they do?
If the listener believes, as I do, that food raised with regenerative farm practices and high animal welfare is healthy for them, if the listener believes that, and I think most of the people at this conference do, then it's incumbent upon them to support that kind of agriculture. And the only way they can support that form of agriculture is by buying from high animal welfare, highly sustainable regenerative farming operations.
Good point. Thank you very much, sir. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Hilda. Appreciate you having me today.
My guest today was Will Harris. Were you intrigued by what you heard? Check out his website, whiteoakpastures.com, and prepare to be blown away. White Oak Pastures is a 150-year-old, multi-generational family farm that cooperates with nature to produce artisan products. To find links to other resources mentioned on the show, just go to westinaprice.org, click on Podcast, and check out the show notes for episode 51. Oh, and a great big thanks to my friends at Podcast Village. They help podcasters create, produce, and promote their shows. You all are awesome. Thanks for your support of Wise Traditions.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with others. Post a link on Facebook or Twitter, or send a link to a friend in an email, or simply review Wise Traditions on iTunes. Sharing the podcast is one way to spread the important message of health through nutrition. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.